Hi, everybody. Joe Cioffi here. Still up in Connecticut today. We are taking a look now at what's going on with Hurricane Irma as it continues to move right along. Not only is it moving along, but it is moving, I believe, from the satellite loops that I've been looking at. It is moving now more to the west-southwest, maybe on a heading instead of about 265 or 260, it might be closer to 250. Just looking at the water vapor imagery. And by the way, you'll see it when I show you the visible just a bit. The hurricane is rather small. I mean, in terms of the inner core, it's only maybe a little over the 100 miles wide from north to south. It's not the big, in terms of the core again. The circulation is rather large, but in terms of the actual core structure, it's small so far. And what may wind up happening is that the hurricane could wind up expanding a bit in terms of size as it moves on to the west. A couple of things that have happened today, and you can see the visible satellite picture here. It is impressive. Look at the outflow, very, very well established around the hurricane. We don't see any real signs of shear. There's an upper low that's sitting to the north and west of it, and that is far enough away that it's not producing any wind shear issues. And it's also creating a flow in the Atlantic, that and the building upper ridge that is beginning to turn this more to the west-southwest. And this first step here is going to be critical in terms of for the northern Leeward Islands, because the weather models today, the GFS seems to be coming more in line with the Europeans' view, and we are seeing my audience is actually quite used to my cat being in the shot. I don't know if they're going to be used to this little pig that we have here. My daughter and my future son-in-law have two dogs and a little pig, and that's the squealing you just heard. Okay, so let me get back to this. You can see the hurricane here moving west-southwestward. How far south it gets will determine the threat to the northern leewards. And if it comes over or very close to the northern leewards, it's certainly going to be increasing the threat to the Bahamas and perhaps eventually to the southeast coast of the United States. So the new GFS run is in, and what you're going to see in this is I matched it up step by step with last night's European so you can see exactly what's going on. And I think the way I'm looking at this is I'm thinking that the GFS track, which continues to come in further west with each passing run. We've gone from Nova Scotia to Portland, Maine, to Rhode Island, Eastern Long Island, to New York City, to Chesapeake Bay. Now I'm going to show you what the model did today in terms of the GFS. I think that is probably going to be the northern extent of the track envelope. The European, which has been among the southernmost of the models, we don't have the new one yet, but we have the overnight one to compare, will wind up being, I think, the southern end. And from there we can see where I'm thinking the greater risk is at this point. And remember, please bear in mind, we are still 7+ days away from this, so there is a lot that can happen and a lot that can change. So we'll get this underway, and we will be back at the end of this with a live chat. And of course, I'll be chatting with you on the chat board here. So just hang on 1 second, and we will get this thing going. Hurricane Irma has taken a decided turn now toward the west-southwest as we take a look at the satellite loop. First off, the circulation of Irma is fairly large. You can see the inflow here coming in down and around, pretty impressive. But the actual core of the hurricane is rather small. From 20 north to about 18 north, we're talking here about 120 nautical miles. It's got a rather tight small core, but it does have a well-defined small eye, and you can see clearly on the loop this morning that it's taking this turn toward the west-southwest. Was moving south of due west, but now I think it's probably more on a heading of about 250 or maybe even 240 degrees. So we'll see how this trend continues during this afternoon. We're now back south of 19 degrees north and in the high 18s and approaching 44 degrees west. This is very important, as we said, in terms of the first question being answered is whether this will be a threat to the northern Leeward Islands. And if that's the more it moves to the southwest and loses some latitude, the greater that threat will be to the northern Leewards. Now, here's a look on the water vapor imagery. You'll notice that the upper low that was sitting in the Atlantic is moving northwestward. It's not really that large in terms of the scope of the Atlantic that it's covering. The dry air that is to the west of Irma is diminishing, and there's Irma itself in that tight, moist area that is moving to the west-southwest, and you can actually see the eye on the water vapor imagery, that little dot right in there. So it might be also gaining a little bit of strength as it moves westward, west-southwestward, and that's because as it loses latitude, it's getting closer and closer to that 28 degrees Celsius water right in this area here. So really, once it gets, as we've been thinking, once it gets west of 45 degrees west, right now on the longitude side, we're almost to 44. So once it gets west of about 45 or so, that's where you see that 28 degrees Celsius line, right about there. So once it gets in this area, this is where the water turns very, very warm, and you'll notice that the water temperatures just east of the Leewards are, pushing 29 and maybe even close to 30 in some spots. So that is going to also give it added juice with regards to strengthening. And then, of course, the waters that are off the southeast coast of the United States, east of the Bahamas out to 60, also very warm, 28 or higher, although there looks like there's this little pocket between the islands, this little short pocket here where the water temperatures was a little bit of a cold eddy in there. But we'll see what that shows up in a few days, because these things do tend to change from time to time. And this was, by the way, the water temperature map analysis as of yesterday. So we'll update this every day to get a new picture of the water temperature profile. The hurricane models track guidance shifting a shade further southwest. You can see how tightly clustered they are, and almost all of them get this somewhere between 25 and 30 degrees north and between 70 and 75 degrees west. So that is important. As the further west it gets, the greater the risk is going to be eventually for the southeast coast of the United States, and also possibly for the eastern Bahamas, and maybe even further west into the Bahamas. And the intensity model guidance is pretty consistent. The vast majority of the models have this as a category 3, and we have at least a few models that have this going up to a category 4. One of them takes it to a category 4 in a big hurry. It has it there within 24 hours. Maybe it's sensing that 28 degree water. I don't know, but we're going to watch the trends this afternoon in terms of what the satellite shows. So let's run to the GFS. The new GFS is out, and one of the things that I've picked up on so far is that it seems to be coming more in line with the European. This is for at least for last night's European, this is the position that the GFS has for this evening. This is the European's position. So actually, in this particular slot, the GFS is a shade further south than the European, oddly enough. We'll move it off to 0Z Monday, which is 8 p.m. Sunday night. and that's the GFS on a decided west-southwest heading, and the European for that time frame actually now was a shade further. The GFS may actually looks like it might be a little bit further to the south than the prior European run, just a little bit, but it's definitely there. So the GFS and the European, seem to be in line here with this southwest course. We'll keep going, and now we are at Monday night, 8 p.m. GFS, European. GFS is actually a little bit further south again at this stage of the game, not by much, but just a little bit. Now, next time frame for the European is 0Z Wednesday, approaching the northern leewards from the east. The GFS at this point almost the same, so they're in lockstep. Here, by the way, is that trough. The next important feature to look at, the trough. The other important feature to look at also is the strength of that upper high. The GFS has that western flank a bit stronger than what it's been showing in prior runs. The European, again, this is for now Tuesday evening. So we're just east of the leewards on the European. The European's trough is a little slower, accessed a little bit further to the west. The flank of the ridge maybe not as pronounced, but it's still strong enough so that the west-northwest motion at this point that starts will likely continue for at least a while. And we'll now go to the next time frame, which is 0Z on Thursday, and the new GFS to match it up for the same time frame is northeast of the European. But the GFS on this run for the first time has the hurricane actually touching the northernmost Leeward Islands. So that's a big change. And again, let's look at the trough in the east. Important, very deep trough here in the eastern part of the United States. Here's the outline of your upper high. So the steering continues to be primarily toward the west-northwest at this point. And we'll compare again to the European. Not that much different. The trough structure and the upper high, they look about the same. Maybe at this point now that the European is actually, I think, maybe a little bit stronger, just a little bit stronger with the ridge. And these are subtleties now that we're looking at the models in terms of trying to find something that will give us an edge as far as the forecast is concerned. Now we'll move up to 0Z Friday. And there's the European. Now at this point, the trough is on, is beginning to lift up and out a bit. The trough is approaching 80 degrees west. The westerlies only extend as far south as southernmost South Carolina. The hurricane is still under the influence of the upper high, still having room to move northwestward. But when we go to the GFS here at this point, the GFS is kind of lined up with the European, but it's to the northeast of it. And also the GFS's trough is deeper. It extends further south down almost into northern Florida. Here's the edge of the ridge. Now you got to remember here, I don't know what the model's going to do, because I haven't seen beyond this point, so we're going to look at it together. The timing of this is critical, because if it catches the trough too early or too late, it makes a huge difference in terms of where it winds up. If it catches into that trough too early, it could wind up going out offshore. If it catches it too late, it will wind up going more toward the southeast coast. Too late, when I'm saying too late, is that the trough has already bypassed it. Okay, I don't want anyone to think that I'm making some kind of a judgment here in terms of being too late for the hurricane to move up, to hit a certain area. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying that it would be too late for the trough to pick it up. So here's the GFS, and there's the European. See, now the European is different with the trough in that it's already pulling it up, and it's got much, more of a ridge. Okay, so let's jump over to the next frame. European at 168 hours, which is Friday night, 8 p.m. GFS at this point. Now here, the differences here become much greater on the models. First off, you have the GFS still hanging this trough back. There's an upper low that it forms over near or just north of Lake Erie, near Toronto. So your trough is, still back. The ridge right in here is that the ridge line that it's following. So it's kind of trying to sneak up into that position. But the European is different, not only in that the trough is already lifted out and pulling away from eastern New England, but the tropical system itself, Irma, is much further to the south and west of the GFS and slower. Okay, there's the GFS. The European from last night is south-southwest of that position by a good number of miles. Very important in terms of figuring out where this goes in the long term. Okay, let's go to the next one. Now we're at Saturday evening. This is the European. Notice on the European, the trough is gone. You have an actual upper high that's building up now over the eastern Great Lakes. The Atlantic ridge is nosed in to the southeast coast of the United States. Okay, so that's the European. Here is the new GFS. Now this is a totally different look, because the GFS is hanging part of that trough back, and it opens up an alleyway where it starts to accelerate this to the north, northwest, and north. So it's just off the, southeast of the Carolinas. Look at the difference again. Here's the GFS. Here's the European from last night for the same time frame. Apparently the models are locked in up until through about day 5, and then after that they start to diverge. Again, the timing of the trough in the east is going to be critical here with regards to where this ultimately winds up. So let's go forward. European at 216. I'm going to hope that we have the GFS out to 216, and we do not have the GFS out to 216, but what the GFS does now is it basically moves that upper low back westward and merges it with the hurricane, and it looks like it's bringing it onshore in northeastern North Carolina and into eastern Virginia. So at this point, we're gonna let me jump away. So 204 hours matches up with the European from last night. So this is the GFS again. And here's the European. So the GFS has it up here. The European has it east of the Florida coast into the northwest Bahamas. They're getting closer and closer together in terms of where the ultimate track winds up. You have the GFS on the northern part, showing probably the northern extent of the envelope, and the European at this point is among the southernmost of all the models. Very, very interesting how this is all playing out. Okay, so let me, at this point, let's go back to the GFS, and just so we resolve the mystery, I'm going to start it from here. So we'll get and I'm going to switch to the Atlantic view, the Western Atlantic view, so we can get it close up and we can see what it does. Whoops. Okay, so there's our hurricane. Pressures in the 940s, so that would be at least a strong Cat 3, borderline Cat 4. And now, we are in Cat 4 territory into Cat 5, if those numbers are to be believed. I mean, that is a 897 millibar pressure, if that's right. There's been a few things about the fact that there may be some issues with regards to the GFS's pressure, and they're trying to work on some kind of a fix. But it's putting out what it's putting out. So let's see. And there it goes. It's moving north-northwest right into, looks like Chesapeake Bay again. This is kind of the third run in a row. It's very similar. So let me go to the eastern view. And here we have it. Right into Chesapeake Bay and then going northwest to Pittsburgh. It seems to me that the runs are coming in. The GFS continues what we said last night, that there's been this sort of gradual westward shift in the track. And I think that continues on today's, obviously that continues on today's run. Remember, we've had 2 hits to Nova Scotia, a couple of hits to Portland, Maine, 1 hit then to Eastern Long Island, then to New York City, then to Chesapeake Bay, and now we're kind of in the southern part of that. So we've gradually come, and then of course we had these out to sea solutions for a while. So we've gradually come from a landfall up here to here, to here, and now we're here, okay? So definitely the trend there is that the GFS is continuing to shift west-southwestward with where the ultimate landfall is, while the European continues to kind of remain consistent. So, you know, if you want to, based on these, on the models, if you want to use the European as maybe the southern extent, the southern, being that it's the southernmost of all the models. So that would be, say, the Europeans, something like that, and the GFS, something like this. Perhaps this is where your risk zone, let's call it, is setting up. Let me do that again. So let me just draw that again. So if we use the Europeans track, something like that, and now we can use the GFS's track into Chesapeake Bay. This area that I'm going to highlight in red would be, maybe we'll call that the area of greatest risk in terms of landfall. That's how I would kind of look at this point. The upper airs are different in how the GFS gets there and how the European gets to its solution, but they both wind up with storms that come toward the southeastern part of the United States. So I think this is where we can leave this. But before we do, I want to just take a look. Why don't we just look at the upper air? By the way, that noise you might be hearing, because I'm at my daughter's house. She has 2 dogs and a pet pig, and the pig and the dog usually get along well, but you know, like any couple, they do tend to have issues every once in a while. All right, so here's the GFS's upper air. You can see what happens with the GFS on the larger scale. Look at that big ridge in the western part of the United States. We haven't really been spending a lot of time on this in the west, but we've got this big ridge out in the west, and that's what allows the trough to amplify in the east. You know, big ridges on both sides, one in the Atlantic and the other one just inland of the west coast, and that deep trough. And again, it's the timing of this that you wind up with what you wind up. And then that northwest hook, because of the fact that you've got this upper low that drops southwestward from the Great Lakes, from Lake Erie down into Indiana. It just basically picks the storm up and then pulls it away to the northwest into western Pennsylvania. The other big development here, at least from the standpoint of the GFS, is that and you have this big ridge that builds up in southern Canada. So that's going to be another part of this equation that we're going to have to deal with as we go forward. So I think at this point we are seeing that west-southwest motion. So let's see how far south it gets. If it winds up going right over the Leeward Islands, that certainly would say that there is a risk to the the southeast coast. You're getting a show here. The southeast coast of the United States, sometime later next weekend or early next week. The GFS continues to be faster. That is something else we're going to have to watch here in terms of the motion. It's a little bit faster than the European, but again, remember that at least early on through the 5th day and to some degree the 6th day, the GFS has come into line more with the prior runs of the European, which has been the most consistent of all the models through this entire event so far. All right, so we'll put a stop to it at this point and come back to you with for a little time, and I'll go through your questions and comments. So we'll just stand by. All right, folks, I'm back. Boy, this is going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. Irma has actually behaved quite well from the standpoint of the forecast models so far, and it seems to be doing everything it's supposed to be doing, turning west-northwest, then west, now west-southwest. So that part of the equation is there. We'll gonna see how far south it gets, because that means if it gets down to about 16, if it gets south of 17 north, it's going to put the northern Leewards at risk. And it also, the further south it gets, gives it more room to eventually get further west, because there isn't really too much out there that's going to pull it up and turn it northward until it gets maybe near 75 west. And you can hear the pig going. I'd pick her up, but apparently she doesn't like to be held, so I don't want to take a chance with her. So she's part of the background noise today, folks. I'm sorry about that. Let me just see a couple of your comments. 27 Nor'easter, thank you very much for being here. Thank you, by the way. You guys hit the super chat every once in a while. If you feel like maybe you want to get me a cigar, works for me. Go right ahead. Okay, so again, 7 days out or more, we're still not in any kind of position to do anything with regards to narrowing down where the landfall is. We can only kind of give a general guess at this point. I mean, it appears to me that the risk to the southeast coast of the United States, judging from what I'm seeing right now, that the risk for that area is increasing based on what we've seen overnight and what we're seeing today. But let's put that into a certain amount of perspective here. We are over a week away, and there's a lot that can change. But I think this is a very good opportunity for those of you who might need to do maybe just a little bit of prepping, just making sure you got stuff that you need to have during these situations. This might not necessarily be a bad time to go ahead and do that. It's a holiday weekend. A lot of folks are away. They may give you at least a leg up with regards to being able to maneuver through stores and finding whatever you might need. So, just as a precaution. If it turns out you don't need it, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Let's see. Antonio Perez, you're flying to Cuba on the 12th. By then, I think most of this is long done, unless we get some surprise shift. As I showed on the map, I think the southernmost extent might be, extreme northeastern Florida. If you get a track that's weighted, even south of where the European had it from the overnight. Again, I'm looking at the European model as the southernmost, the GFS on the northern end. That to me seems to be the two wider extremes at this point. The GFS, again, coming in closer to the European's view. With respect to impacts, if there's going to be something coming into the southeast, that's going to depend on, what happens when it goes inland. Does it hook northward and then turn northwestward like the GFS has? Does it go north or then northeastward? That we don't know, and I'm not going to be able to get into that until we get. Let's figure out where this is going. No, the upper airs are different beyond the 5th and 6th day, and that's going to mean different things in different inland areas. And by the way, point someone made earlier, and I think it bears repeating. This is not going to be a Harvey situation where something winds up. If we do get a landfall in the United States, whatever comes in keeps on moving. And actually, the further north, it's going to move faster and faster. So this is not something that is going to sit over some particular, certainly not sit over any particular area for days and days and days and linger around producing horrific rainfalls like they saw in East Texas. This is a totally different setup. The Harvey situation in Texas, from the standpoint of the upper air, was pretty obvious 5 days ahead of time. It was a worst case scenario for them because the hurricane found itself sitting in between two ridges and well south of the main jet stream. It had no place to go. It had no push from any direction, and it just kind of stalled out right in there. So that is not going to be the case here with what's going on. From what I'm seeing, from what's being shown, this is going to be something that moves in and moves along. It may not necessarily move along at a quick rate, but it will move along. The further north, usually you get these things to move faster and faster. You start to get forward speeds of 20, 30, 40 miles an hour. They go in a little further south, the forward speeds might be a little bit lower. But these are all these are all factors that will determine when we get there. Let's see. Okay, Cynthia goes, the 12Z ensembles are close to operational tracks clustered around the Delmarva Peninsula, but scattered between the Carolinas and Florida. Yeah, at least that the operational run kind of falls in there someplace. Unlike last night when it really was on it by itself and everything was way to the southwest. The scattering would make a lot of sense to me. Again, my thinking is that GFS northern track is the northernmost extent because of the fact that it keeps coming in further and further southwest. Unless we get some kind of surprise from the European today where it suddenly decides to go north, I would be surprised if that does happen, because the European has really been very consistent, and it has it's wavered a little bit. But for the most part, it's been very consistent in its track. So I don't think that we'll see that change too much. The other thing, by the way, and this has to do with the timing of this system and the forward speed with the troughs. That is equally important, because the GFS's speed, it moving it faster and further north. It gets involved with that trough. The GFS's timing of the upper trough is different than the European. So if the European is wrong on this, there might be, there's of course room for different outcomes. I'm not 100%. I'm not 100% there on terms of where I'm laying this idea of Chesapeake Bay on the northern side and maybe southwest coastal Georgia or northernmost Florida on the southern side. I'm not married to that idea permanently here, folks. This could, I could wind up shifting this around and moving it in any direction because of the fact that you've got the timing issue, very important, and the fact that the troughs in the trough in the east beyond the 5th day is handled differently. Thank you, Stan, very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for hitting the super chat. That's great. I really appreciate it much. Okay, so let me just give you a written thank you. That upper air is obviously critical. And yes, Stan, really, it is a far cry from your childhood days taping forecasts on a cassette recorder. Same here. And I go back, to the late 70s with regards to that, where we were so lucky because where I worked for a couple of years on the Today Show with Willard Scott, which was a wonderful experience to have while I was in college. But we had one of the satellite fax machines, and we were getting satellite pictures every hour. And that was huge because you just didn't have access to that sort of stuff. Nobody did. You were fortunate if you had something in a newspaper maybe the next day, but that was about it. And you guys these days with everything that's on here with respect to all the tools and the satellites and the data, a lot of it didn't. Vast 90% of it or more didn't even exist back at the time that I started. So we've come a long, long way. And in some ways, maybe not necessarily better. I'm kind of the view that there's just too many models to look at. And, that's gotten a lot of people away from actual forecasting and more along the lines of being, basically model interpreters and model huggers. I try not to do that. It's very easy to fall into that trap. Because they're all over. There's so many of them, and on the one hand, you want to see as much data and as many options, so you get an idea of what's happening. But it can also be extremely confusing, and it can get in the way of when your mind and how you interpret your data based on your experience tells you to go one way, and then you start having to fight models which might necessarily take you in a different direction. So it's not always a big positive to have all this stuff, okay? Because after a while you can have too much stuff. The RGEM does not go out past 48 hours, Raymond. The Canadian is, from what I understand, the Canadian or GGEM model. I didn't look at it. I'll look at it now. I was told that it's not too different from the GFS. Let's see. Yeah, the Canadian has. Actually, it's interesting. Let me get a little closer so I can give you a full idea. When you look at the GFS's pressures, they're a little bit ridiculous. The Canadian actually has a Category 3 hurricane coming in near Wilmington, North Carolina, and then hooking up into Northern Virginia and into Western Pennsylvania. So it's not that different from the GFS. It's actually very close. And it also has the GFS's timing, which would be would be next Sunday. It would be approaching the southeast coast Friday night and Saturday, so that would be inside the 7-day window as a Category 3, and then it turns north-northeast briefly, then northward, and north-northwestward, coming inland right near Wilmington or just west of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, rides up over eastern Virginia, not right over the Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and then over to Pittsburgh. That is I think it's plausible. Okay, that is a plausible solution. Let's see. Awesome Gamer, the Bermuda High gets weak and strong. It's the fluctuations in strength of the ridge in the Atlantic, definitely a big player here. And being that ridge right now is in strengthening mode is one of the big reasons why we have Irma moving west-southwest. And rather than, normally when they're already up almost to 20 north, this far east, they're gone. They turn north, northwest, north, and northeast. But Irma got to that latitude and then ran into this building ridge that's going to be building for the next several days. So it prevented it from doing what storms at this latitude and longitude usually do, which is to recurve probably before they even get to 50 degrees west. Okay. I hope I say this right. I always like to try. Ivelice Ortiz in Puerto Rico. I hope I got that right. I gave it my good Italian try, and as a native speaker, I can roll my R's. You're in Puerto Rico. Okay. I think you might want to just kind of keep attention on this because of the fact that if it tracks a little further south and skims the leewards, it may the center may pass fairly close to the north shore of Puerto Rico. So let's watch that carefully. How bad would it be in Harrisburg if it came up the bay? Ryan, it wouldn't be fun. I mean, you certainly would get a fair amount of wind and rain out of it. So it'll be like it would be formidable for a while. Are the 10 meter and 850 maps useful for determining sustained wind, Cynthia? I would use the 10 meter, and remember that's in knots, and that's the sustained wind. Okay, so I'm trying to remember if you can get something that does show. I think there's somewhere that it might show gusts. There's some maps around. My brain is fading here at the moment. Just give me a second. The 10 meter wind anomaly is actually not bad in terms of what it wants to show as a tool. I've used it before and it works pretty well at the surface. But again, remember that we're talking sustained winds there. I'm trying to see if there was. I know I've seen gust maps somewhere. Just give me. Let me just check here. 10 meter wind. Yeah, so I think we just have the sustained wind. Now, I'm looking at the map in front of me off the Tropical Tidbits website, off the GFS, and the red areas of 40 to 50 knot winds running from northeastern North Carolina to the New Jersey coast actually brings it almost to the south shore of Long Island in terms of the winds based on that track. And of course, it has the reflection of the hurricane force winds. The winds of 50 knots or higher. I'm going to have to go to a wider region to see this better. Assuming the GFS track is correct, which brings it inland near Cape Hatteras. I'm sorry, I was looking at the GGEM, the Canadian. Let me go to the GFS on the 10 meter wind. Yeah, coming into Chesapeake Bay, I mean, you've got these winds way in excess of 84 knots, and it brings hurricane force winds up to up the New Jersey coast to just north of Atlantic City. Of course, if you got those strong winds into Delaware Bay, but the winds do diminish somewhat. The sustained winds, gales would be up toward the Long Island and in through most of New Jersey. Sustained winds, by the way, 30 to 40. So you could certainly double those numbers if you want to get an idea of what the gusts could be. Again, assuming that that's the correct track, because that is, of course, at the end of the day, the big question is, is going to be the track. All right, folks, I think we're going to call it a day today. I'm not going to do a live stream tonight. I'm just a little bit tired after doing one last night and then doing this one. So unless we get some kind of really crazy, radical thing, maybe I'll throw a short one up if that's the case. But I need a bit of a break and a little bit of time. So I'm going to take that, and I'll be doing something tomorrow during the late morning, perhaps. I'll see what my schedule is like. I'm trying to also enjoy a little bit of time off while the weather is okay. And as I've been saying the last couple of streams that I've done, make sure you take some time to enjoy the holiday weekend if the weather where you are is good. Don't spend all your time, sitting here and doing weather all day long. Get outside, do something that you enjoy. Go do a little fishing. Head to the beach and just take advantage of when the weather is you have the weather working in your favor. Okay, all right. So, folks, I'll have some posts coming up later this afternoon on the website at meteorologistjoecioffi.com, and you can always check on Facebook too, on my Facebook page, Meteorologist Joe Cioffi. Have a great day. And thank you very much to Tropical Tidbits again. I want to give credit and to the great website with the graphics that we show you are from tropicaltidbits.com. And the music that's on at the beginning, the piece today was called Periculum, and it's by Kai Engel, Kaingel, and you can access that on the freemusicarchive.org, freemusicarchive.org, where there's a lot of good stuff and some very, very interesting and well done pieces, and from some very creative people that are willing to share their work, which is very generous of them. Thank you for all of those, for those of you, all of you that have said some very kind things with regards to these videos. I'm very glad that you're on my channel. If you're new today, welcome. Subscribe so you can get notified when the live streams are coming up. And of course, while we're in this storm mode, I'm going to try and get 2 live streams done a day so we can update the models as we draw closer and closer to whatever it is we're going to wind up having to deal with as far as Hurricane Irma is concerned. Okay, have a great day. Tired. Talk to you soon.